Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Make sure mics are on. Great to see you. Great to be back in our beautiful sanctuary here. Cold morning, but certainly a beautiful morning and a great opportunity for us to pray together. So we'll get started, as we always do, with just a little bit of singing. And you're welcome to join me at home. Ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, la 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 la, ya la la ya la la ya la la ya la la ya la ya la 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 ya 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 la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la la ya la 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 Ivdu et Adonai besimcha, ivdu et Adonai besimcha. Mo lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And if you were capable of watching something like this on Shabbat, that melody is from a dear family friend of ours, Rabbi Moshe Shur, who's an incredible musician, wonderful person all around. So every time I get to sing, it's really a lovely thing. It reminds me of him. And I hope someday soon I'll get to see him again. He's a really wonderful guy. We're on page 186. We'll begin our service this morning with thanks and gratitude. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Thanks to you, Adonai, ever living sovereign, that you have restored my soul to me in mercy. How great is your trust. Turn now to page 192, Matovu, the very top of the page. Matovu, Ohalecha Yaakov, Mishkenotecha Israel. Page 194, we'll read together in Hebrew at the top of the page, a blessing for our bodies. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yatzar et adam bechokma uvara vo nekavim nekavim, chalulim chalulim, galui biyado lifnei chisei chavodecha, she'im yipatech echad mehem, o yisatem echad mehem, I efshar lehitkayem v'la'amod lefanecha. Baruch atah Adonai Rofech Chol Basar Umafli La'asot. We're now on page 196, the very top of the page in Hebrew, a blessing for our souls. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. Elohai neshama shenatata bihi tehora tehorahim. Elohai neshama shenatata bihi tehorahim. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorahim.
1
We'll turn now to page 197, read together in English at the top of the page. Matter is never destroyed, only transformed. So too can the soul evolve higher and higher, from instinct to inspiration, haughtiness to holiness, selfishness to service, from individualism to union, to join with the soul of souls, the infinite one. As the soul is magnified and sanctified, so is the infinite one exalted. Baruch atah Adonai, asher biado nefesh kol chai, veruach kol besar ish. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 198, Nisim b'chol yom, beginning at the top of the page and continuing on to the next couple of pages. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasach v'yivina, lafchin meyom v'layla. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzad degaber. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, albish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten le'aev koach. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavir shinam einai utnuma me'af apai. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani b'tzelem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani be'et chorin. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Oter Yisrael b'tifarah. If you're still standing at home, you may be seated. We'll turn now to the top of page 205. We'll read the top reading in English, a blessing for the study of Torah. We seekers of God, how do we find you? In good deeds and in the study of Torah. In your search for us, you find us in the bending of the knee, in the rigor of study, in the honesty of commerce, through a good heart, through decency, in respect, true fellowship, companionship, and love, through truth and peace, in the no that is really no, and the yes that is really yes. Baruch atah Adonai, hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. We're now on page 206, very top of the page in Hebrew. Elu devarim she'ein lahem shiur, she'elam ochel perotehem ba'olam hazeh, ve'akeren kayemet lo le'olam haba, ve'elu hen, kibud avayim ugmilut chasadim, ve'hashkamat beit hamidrash shacharit ve'aravit, ve'achlasat orchim u'ikor cholim, והכנסת כלה לוויית המת ועיון תפילה, ואהבת שלום בין אדם לחברו, ותלמוד תורה כנגד כולם. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 212 for the opening blessing of Pezukei de Zimra. Baruch shehamar me'ayah baruch hu, Baruch hoseh bereshit, Baruch homer ve'yoseh, Baruch hozeh u'mekayem, Baruch merachem al haaretz, Baruch merachem al habriot, Baruch meshalem sachar tov l're'av, Baruch chayad v'kayam lanetzach, Baruch bodeh u'matziel, Baruch shemo, b'shvachot u'b'zmirot negadelcha, u'nshabechecha nefecha v'naskir shimcha v'namlichecha malkeinu Eloheinu,
יחיד חי העולמים, מלך משובח ומפואר עד שמו הגדול, ברוך אתה אדוני, מלך מהולל בתשבחות.
If you're still standing, you may be seated as we turn to page 214 and we begin the second line down from the top in Hebrew.
Tov lehodot l'Adonai, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, ואמונתך בלילות, ואמונתך בלילות, טוב להודות לאדוני. עלי אסור ולנבל, עלי היגיון בכינור, כי שימחתני אדוני בפועלך, במעשה ידיך רנן. מה גדלו מעשיך היה, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. מה גדלו מעשיך היה, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. מה גדלו מעשיך היה, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך.
We're now on page 215. We'll begin together at the top of the page and then continue silently on to the next.
Ashrei Yoshrei Veitecha, Od Yalelucha, Od Yalelucha. Ashrei Yoshrei Veitecha, Od Yalelucha, Od Yalelucha. Selah, Ashrei Aham Shekalo Hashem. ואנחנו נברך ים, מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה, הללויה, Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Psalm 150, page 218.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 el beko בקודשו, הללוהו ברכיהו זו, הללוהו בגבורותיו, הללוהו כרוב כולו, הללו, 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 הללו. Hallelu, 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 hallelujah. Hallelu, beteka shofar, hallelu, benebel bechinor, hallelu, betofu machol, hallelu, beminim vehugav. Hallelu, 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 betziatzalei shama, hallelu, betziatzalei trua. Kol hanshama tehallelya, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. At the top of page 219. נשמת כל החי, תברך את שמך אדוני אלוהינו ברוח. Continue silently. Now on page 220, the very top of the page. Ihilu finu malehe shira kayam ulshoneinu rina kamon galav vesiftotenu shevach kemarchevei rakiyam ועינינו מאירות כשמש וכירח וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כילות אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואימותינו. We continue silently. On page 222. Shochenan marhom mekadosh shemo vechatu v'ranenu tzadikim Adonai la yesharim na'avat tehilah befi yesharim titalav divrei tzadikim titbarachu b'lshon chasidim titromamu b'kerev kedoshim titkadashu b'makehalot רבבות עמך בית ישראל ברינה יתפאר שמך מלכנו בכל דור ודור ימי Yai bye bye, yai bye bye, yai bye bye, bye bye, bye. Ay bye bye, yai bye bye, yai bye bye. We rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 223 for the concluding blessing of Pesukei Zimra, and we will remain standing again in body or spirit through the Chatzi Kaddish on the next page, and then the Baruch Hu on the page after that. Yishtabach Shimcha Alat Malkeinu Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol VeHaKadosh B'Shamayim u'Ba'aretz Ki Lecha Na'e Adonai Eloheinu V'Eloi Avotenu Ve'imotenu Shir U'Shvach Alav V'Zimra Ha'ozu Memshala Netzach Gedula U'Gvura Tila V'Tiferet Kedusha U'Malchut Brachot Ve'Hodaot Me'ata V'Ad Olam Baruch Ata Adonai El Melech Gadol V'Tishbachot El HaHodaot Adon HaNiflaot Abocher B'Shirei Zimra Melech El Chei HaOlamim Yitkadav Shemei Rabbah Ve'amad Yirav Chirutei V'yamlich Malchutei V'chaychon v'yamechon v'chayid v'chol Beit Yisrael Ma'agala v'izman karib yimeru Amen. Yesh me'rabah mevarach le'alam li'amei al-mayam Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shemei dekucha b'richu Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damira ve'alma v'imeru amen. Barechu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed.
Standing at home, please be seated. Let's read together on page 229, the second reading in English, and then we'll bounce back to 228 for Chadash, which are the 3 lines of Hebrew, just in the middle of the page towards the end. You are praised, who rolls out the rough, raw clay of the universe into delicate vessels of light. And from nothing at all, we could perceive in a world that has turned old, a shimmering new creation right before our eyes, made this moment just for us. How much of life reveals your presence? How much Torah unfolds from each new flower, from each new wave that breaks upon the sea? You are praised, who forms the clay that cloaks our lives, the delicate vessels which contain our light. Or Chadash, Al Zion Tahir. Or Chadash, Al Zion Tahir. V'nizkechu lanu mehera le'orom. V'nizkechu lanu mehera le'orom. Yadadai dai bim bim bam, yadadai dai bim bam, yadadai dai bim bim bam, yadadai dai dai. Yadadai dai bim bim bam, yadadai dai bim bam, yadadai dai bim bim bam, yadadai dai dai. Baruch Ata Adonai Yotzer HaMeorot. Turn now to page 230, and we'll read together first in English at the top of the page, and then the Hebrew at the bottom. How deeply you have loved us, Adonai our God, gracing us with surpassing compassion. On account of our forebears whose trust led you to teach them the laws of life, be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, have mercy on us by making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach, and lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is in your Torah.
והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחד לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך, ולא נבוש ולא ניכלם ולא ניכשל לעולם ועד, כי בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך, והביאנו לשלום מהר בכנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו. כי אל פועל ישועות אתה ובנו בחרת, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע באמת. להודות לך יחידך באהבה, ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד.
We're on page 234.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושינתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, ושרתם להות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
We're now on page 236.
ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף בטיל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית, וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Okay, we're now on the top of page 239, if you would please join with me. Emet, there is no place where you are not. Even in the wilderness, there is your word. Emet, that pen strokes of lightning, white fire, black flame, stir the soul's passion, guide our sacred way, true and enduring is Torah. Your truth for us is certain and established now and forevermore. Like Moses, Miriam, and all Israel, we sing out and rejoice. We're on the bottom now of page 238, beginning 4 lines up in Hebrew, Tehilot le'el elyon.
Tehilot le'el elyon, baruch u'mevorach, Moshe u'Miriam u'bnei Israel, lechanu שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. Ay la 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 חדשה שיפחו גאולים לשמך על שפתיים. יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ופדחן יומך יהודה וישראל גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני God Yisrael. We rise in body or spirit as we begin the Amidah together on page 242 and then continue silently. Please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, if you are standing, you may be seated. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. For those who are still continuing their silent Amidah, please go and continue. You can always catch up to us as we move on. Those that are finished, however, we will rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 324, and we repeat the Amidah, again, page 324. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Eloi Avotenu Ve'imotenu, Eloi Abraham, Eloi Yitzchak, Eloi Yaakov, Eloi Sarah, Eloi Rivka, Eloi Rachel, Eloi Leah, Ha'el HaGadol, HaGibor VeHaNorah, El Elyon, Gomer Chasadim Tovim, Ve'koneh HaKol, Ve'zocher Chasdei Avot Ve'imahot, U'mevii Geula Libnei Bneihem Leman Shemo B'Yahvah, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Ezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayei Metim Atah Loshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Marid HaGashem, Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayei Metim Berachamim Rabim, Zomech Noflim Ve'Rofech Olim, Umatir Asurim Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar Micha Mocha B'Geburot Umido Melach Melech Memit Umechayeh Umatzmiach Yeshua V'Nevanat Al Chayot Metim Baruch Atah Adonai Mechayeh HaMetim. We're on page 326. Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam, keshem shemati shimo, tov ishmi marom, ככתוב על יד אביך וכרז אל זה ואמר קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך כל הארץ כבודו אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו אחד הוא אלוהינו הוא אבינו מלכנו ומושיענו והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו לעיני כל חי אני אדוני אלוהיכם ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור. Hallelujah. We're on page 328. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד לך. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד לך. ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לעולם לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
If you are still standing at home, you may be seated as we turn to top of page 329. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. מקדשי מקדשי שבי שבת. כולם יספרו ויתענגו מטובך שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. והשביעי רצית בו וקידשתו שבת. חמדת ימים אותו קראת שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. זכר למעשה בראשית שבת. ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. אלוהינו אלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו רצה רצה במנוחתנו. קדשנו במצוותיך ותן חלקנו בתורתך. צהבנו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך. וטהר ליבנו לעובדך באמת והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו. מאהבה ורצון שבת קודשך ונלכו ישראל מקדשי שמך. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. We're going to turn now to page 330. We'll read together in English. On this Shabbat day, as you graciously receive our prayers, help us to hear your call.
Grant us enough health to fulfill our duties and the compassion we need to attend to others. Teach us humility that we may perceive our own faults, and grant us the wisdom to be forgiving of others. Give us the courage to be true to our highest selves and the charity to see the best in those around us. Give us patience enough not to become discouraged, hope enough to overcome all fears for the future, and faith enough to know your presence. O source of blessing, look with favor upon us. May our offerings be acceptable to you. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otcha levadcha bira navod. We turn now to page 332, beginning at the bottom of the page. We'll read the paragraphs in English, continuing on to the next. And at the end of each English paragraph, we will say the words together in Hebrew, Modim anachnu lach, offering our gratitude to God for all of these gifts. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations, Modim anachnu lach. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons, Modim anachnu lach. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements, Modim anachnu lach. For human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression. Modim anachnu lach. For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared. Modim anachnu lach. For all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom. Modim anachnu lach. For human liberties and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose. Modim anachnu lach. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulachanai lehodot. We're now on page 334. Sim shalom tova uvracha chen chesed merachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael hamecha borcheinu yotzreinu kulanu kechad ve'or panecha ki be'or panecha natata lanu Adonai Eloheinu. Sim shalom tova uvracha chen chesed merachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael hamecha Torat chaim ve'ahavat chesed u'tzedaka u'veracha verachamim v'chaim v'shalom. Sim shalom tova uvracha chen chesed verachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael hamecha v'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael bechol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שים שלום טובה וברכה חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל עמך. ברוך אתה אדוני המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום. We turn now and read together at the top of page 337. Prayer is not purely an act. All things pray and all things pour forth their souls. The heavens pray, the earth prays, every creature and every living thing. In all life there is longing. Creation is itself but a longing, a kind of prayer to the Almighty. What are the clouds, the rising and the setting of the sun, the soft radiance of the moon, the gentleness of the night? What are the flashes of the human mind and the storms of the human heart? They are all prayers, the wordless outpouring of boundless longing for God. Oseh shalom bimromav shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. V'emeru amen.
We will rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 362. Page 362, Seder Kriyat HaTorah. Again, rise in body or spirit as the ark is open.
אין כמוך באלוהים אדוני ואין כמעשיך מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני יעוז למו ייתן. אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. אבא הרחמים היטיבה ברצונך את ציון. תבנה חומות ירושלים, כי בך לבד בטחנו מלך אל רם ונישא אדון עולמים. כי מציון תצא תורה, כי מציון תצא תורה, ודבר אדוני מירושלים. ברוך שנתן תורה תורה, ברוך שנתן תורה תורה לעמו ישראל מקדושתו. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. אחד אלוהינו גדול אדוננו קדוש שמו. גדול אדוני תהיו נרוממה שמו יחדיו. לך אדוני הגדולה והגבורה והתפארת והנצח וההוד, כי כל בשמיים ובארץ, כי כל בשמיים ובארץ. לך אדוני הממלכה והמתנשא לכל ראש. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This morning we read from Parshat Bo, which will begin, if you're following at home, on page 357 in the Women's Torah Commentary. And in the Plowed Chumash, it begins on page 406. So again, page 406 in the Plowed Chumash, page 357 in the Women's Torah Commentary. And if you're following at home, you're looking for, again, Parshat Bo or Exodus chapter 10. And we'll read the first Aliyah this morning in just a few moments. But before we read our Torah reading this morning, to think a little bit about Parshat Bo, and one of the most sort of unusual parts of it is where it begins. Namely the fact that last week, and those that were with us in Torah study, we spent a good amount of time walking through each of the different plagues and their causes, their concerns, the reasons why, all of these kind of elements. But as we noted last week, it ends sort of strangely because it ends before we have completed the 10 plagues. In fact, I think if I'm not mistaken, we get all the way through the 6th plague, 7th plague at the end of last week, and we begin this week with the 8th plague, okay, in which we begin with locusts. So the question then becomes, why is it that you have the first bunch in one parsha and the second bunch in the other? Thematically, it makes no sense. Why not simply elongate last week's portion by Ra and continue it on, and then start from really where is the end of this week's portion, and then move on from there? So there are a few explanations according to the rabbis. To be frank, none of them were really all that compelling to me, save for one of them that points out that there is one distinction between the last 3 plagues and the earlier 7, which is to say that the last 3 of them, and this I learned from my teacher, one of our good friends here and members of the Temple, Rabbi David Wyman, who wrote a really brilliant piece this week for his reflection, his Devar Torah, on the Parsha. And he points out that there is this understanding that the last several of these plagues are really actually, again, in some form or the other, all about darkness. That even the one that ultimately begins this week's portion, in which we're talking about locusts, there are so many of them, ultimately speaking, that they cover over, according to the tradition, the sky. Right? They make it as if darkness. At that point, think of it more as sort of your sort of standard kind of darkness. And then ultimately, when we get with Choshech, which is the sort of darkness, we get a different level of it. We get something that is actually much more supernatural, much more really terrifying, is probably the best description that we can come up with. So he points to it in his teaching, but also if you have the Plav Chumash, this is just also a great teaching opportunity. One of the great things about having a Torah commentary as opposed to just a Torah text or a Tanakh text is that the commentary offers precisely that, commentary. And so why we refer to this as the Plaut Chumash is because the Gunther Plaut, who was a renowned rabbi and commentator, created and edited the selection of commentaries that you will find in this book. So at the end of each portion, there's something that's referred to as gleanings, an accidental choice of word, which there are sort of small teachings from here and there. So in the end here, and this is page 424 if you want to follow at home, you get a little explanation here, several different possible explanations of this darkness and what it's really all about. And in particular, as I said, the sort of the Choshech level of darkness, not the locust, not the covering over of the skies, but really ultimately speaking this plague of darkness. So we get 3 different options here. So Sforno, one of the great Italian rabbis, commentators, says, generally darkness is merely the absence of light. Okay? Darkness is merely the absence of light, and therefore can be dispelled simply by lighting a fire. But this darkness was so thick that it could be touched. That's the tradition, is to understand that it could literally be touched. So it therefore was a darkness of a deeper nature. This Hasidic teaching, of which I think we probably have to go to the back to figure out exactly where it's coming from, and it's, Hasidic is a very large phrase. But it teaches that the darkness was in fact so dense that people could not see one another. Okay, and Rabbi Wyman points to this in his reading as well. This, as the Hasidim teach, this is the worst of all darknesses, when people are unable to see their neighbor. That is, to note their distress and to help them. And I think that last kola is really quite significant. Okay, so the Midrashic tradition, as Rabbi Wyman points to, right, it says it, but it leaves it to our imagination to understand why that was so scary, that it was such a deep darkness that it could literally be touched. So this Hasidic thing helps us to understand, right, and the Midrash picks up on it as well, that it's scary because you can't see anything beyond yourself. But this Hasidic teaching adds something even more important, which is that what is the main thing about it, right, that when our vision is taken away such that we can't even see our neighbor, it's not for the sake of us and for us feeling safer because we can see somebody other than ourselves. The concern, according to this Hasidic teaching, is that we aren't able to note their distress and help them.
Okay? It's two different readings. It's very important to understand the distinction. Right? One of them is about our own fear. Another is about our realization that we cannot help others with their fear. And I think we need to really think about and really contemplate what that distinction is about. So the Katav Sofer, who's another great classical commentator, says that when a person does not see others or want to see them, there is darkness in the world. So here we have, again, various images and understandings of what this sort of last three plagues, if in fact we will take this understanding that the reason why these three plagues are set aside, why they are in their own portion, as opposed to being a continuation of Vayera, is because they are tied together by this idea, this image of darkness, manifested in really three different ways. First, by the locusts, again, covering over the skies. The second, by this primordial, supernatural darkness that God provides, the choshech. And ultimately, makat bechorot, the taking of the firstborn, the ultimate darkness, right? The ultimate darkness, which again, is certainly about the darkness of simply of killing, but also the realization that if all the firstborn male children are ultimately taken of the Egyptians, the decimation that results from that, really an entire generation can be lost because none of those children will grow and will have their ability to pass on themselves into a next generation. So we really see all of these different kind of elements of darkness. But I love really the depth of what we're seeing here in both the Hasidic teaching and the Katav Sofer's teaching, and in other words, where we can understand darkness in this case was not just about the sort of fear of something happening that was supernatural, or necessarily even of God's might, or of the horrors of the taking of life. All those things may be in fact true. But one of the other elements that seems to be of great concern, especially to the Hasidic masters, is the idea that one could not even see and ultimately help those suffering around them. And I think that that's been a lot of the, again, Rabbi Wyman does a beautiful job in his teaching of drawing a connection to our contemporary realities, and not just contemporary, but certainly a period of time in which we have been living, in which it seems like that darkness is not a darkness that comes from God, it doesn't come from animals, it doesn't come from anything other than the fact that we increasingly stop seeing the others around us and their suffering. We can't acknowledge the suffering of others in a way that is necessary in order for us to really live, quote unquote, in the light. Right? As the teaching of Sforno points out, if this was just a matter of the absence of light, we would simply manifest light to change the paradigm, to change the reality. But it's not as simple as turning on a light switch or kindling a fire. The kind of darkness that we are dealing with right now, in which we are not able to see each other, and not, again, just to not be able to see each other, hear each other, but to not see each other's suffering in particular, I think is extremely problematic. That I think part of the suffering that we see as a society right now, part of this darkness, is the fact that our empathy is, as a muscle, has atrophied. It has been beaten down, and not without blame, right? We all can identify individuals, groups, characteristics, things that have pushed our society in that direction, but we've allowed ourselves to be pushed as well. And I think it's a convenience of life to suggest that we are the only ones that suffer, and those who oppose us have no idea of our suffering. It's a problematic road. It's a slippery slope that I think human beings have a tendency to go down, and the results are disastrous. And I think that part of our responsibility, as I said, a lot of my thinking and teaching over the last few weeks has been, things have certainly changed to a degree, but we're faced with the same kinds of challenges. So if we're going to teach the same way and think the same way and act the same way, then it would be insane to assume that there's a different outcome at the end of this. Every one of us has to start to make some adjustments. And even those of us who really, again, struggle with this, we have to be able to contemplate and see the suffering of those even with whom we disagree, even those with whom we may even violently disagree. Because if we can't acknowledge their suffering, we can't expect them to acknowledge ours, and vice versa. It is a related concept. And that's where, again, we come back to our teaching for today, in which this idea, again, of not being able to see the distress and not to be able to help, this is really the true darkness that we should all be afraid of. And I think that it's not impossible to find our way out. Remember, even with the plagues, they were not permanent. They were a necessary, sadly necessary step in time. But they eventually abate.
So the question is, what are we going to do? We don't have God to rely on in this particular case. I think we are left really to our own devices to try to lift the darkness. So I think each of us has to take that responsibility on our own shoulders and really begin to think and act and change our behavior in such a way that we can start to see each other again. We can start to hear each other's cries for help and ultimately to respond to them. And by doing so, to create the just society that I believe both God and our country expect and demand of us. So with that, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. And again, a reminder, if you're following along at home, we're going to be reading the first 11 verses of Parshat Bo, beginning on page 406 in the Cloud Chumash, or on page 357 in the Women's Torah Commentary. And just get myself situated over here. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMorach. Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah. Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe Bo el Paro ki ani הכברתי את ליבו ואת לב עבדיו למען שיתי אותותיי אלה בקרבו ולמען תספר מאוזני בנך ובין בנך את אשר התעלתי במצרים ואת אותותיי אשר שמתי בם וידעתם כי אני אדוני. ויבוא משה ואהרון אל פרעה ויאמרו אליו כה אמר אדוני אלוהי העברים עד מתי מאנת לענות מפני שלח עמי ויעבדוני כי אם מה אין אתה לשלח את עמי הנני מביא מחר 4 בגבולך וכיסה את עין הארץ ולא יוכל לראות את הארץ ואכל את יתר הפלטה הנשארת לכם מן הברד ואכל את כל העץ הצומח לכם מן השדה ומלאו בתיך ובתי כל עבדך ובתי כל מצרים אשר לא ראו אבותיך ואבות אבותיך מיום היותם על האדמה עד היום הזה. ויפן ויצא מעם פרעה ויאמרו עבדי פרעה אליו עד מתי יהיה זה לנו למוקש שלח את האנשים ויעבדו את אדוני אלוהיהם הטרם תדע כי עבדה מצרים ויושב את משה ואת אהרון אל Adonai Elohechem mi v'mi haholechim. Vayomer Moshe min areinu uvizkunenu vizkenenu vin areinu uvizkenenu nelech bevanenu uvivnotenu vetzoenu uvivkarenu nelech ki chag Adonai lanu. Vayomer alehem Yehi chen Adonai imachem kasher ashalach etchem ve'et tapchem re'u ki ra'a neged pneichem lo chen lechu na'agvarim ve'ivdu et Adonai ki ota atem mevakshim vayegaresh ota ve'et bnei Pharaoh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Before we lift and dress the Torah, we'll take a moment to think of those in our lives, in our community, and around the world who are in need of healing as we turn to page 371 to offer our Mishaberach. Mishaberach Avotenu v'imotenu Abraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, v'yivarech et hacholim ha'elu. Begin by thinking this morning of Chaim Leib, Alyssa Peak, Andrew Edelman, Robert Posner, Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Phyllis Silver, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chava, Sandra Furman, Raina Walsh, Deirdre Klein, Stephanie Skitt, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Roz Brody, Chana Ruth Bat Sarah, Marlise Silverberg, Susan Spruce, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva, Elisheva Bat Sarah, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idol Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Ben Chaim, Rivka Bat Devorah, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Neil Elliott and Eileen Rosen, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kasov, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klotman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, and Leah Bat Naomi. If you're thinking of anyone else this morning who is in need of healing, please mention their names aloud at home or simply hold them in your hearts as we offer our Mishaberach again. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Alehem Lachalimam L'Rabatam L'Chazikam Ve'ishlach Lahem Mehira Refuah Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim Refuat HaNefesh Refuat HaGuf Hashtabach Alav Zman Kariv and Omar Amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal those who are suffering. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and the strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit, and let us say together, Amen. El Narefana La, El Narefana La, El Narefana La, Refuah Shelema, El Narefana Lo, El Narefana Lo, El Narefana Lo, Refuah Shelema. And I'll invite you to rise in body or spirit as the Torah is lifted and dressed. We're on the bottom of page 370. Vezot haTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai be'ad Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. If you're standing, please be seated. This morning's Haftarah comes from the prophet Jeremiah. It's found on page 427 if you are following at home, and you have a plowed chumash, again, page 427. If you're following in some other fashion, you're again looking for the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 46, verses 13 to 28. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar b'nbiim tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abocher b'torah u'b'Moshe avdo u'Yisrael amo b'nbiei ha'emet v'tzedek. This is the word of the Eternal, spoke to Jeremiah the prophet concerning an attack on Egypt by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Declare it in Egypt, announce it in Migdol, and in Memphis, and Taphanes. Say, take your stand, be ready, for the sword is devouring all around you. Why did chaff flee? Your champion did not stand fast, for the Eternal has driven him away. He made many stumble, one falling over the next, and they said, quick, let us go back to our people, to the land where we were born, away from the flashing sword. There they called Pharaoh king of Egypt, big noise, who has missed his chance. As I live, says the Eternal One, the sovereign God of heaven's hosts, Tavor is among the mountains, as Carmel is by the sea. So shall Nebuchadnezzar come. Pack your bags for exile, fair Egypt, dwelling so safe and sound. Memphis will become a desolation, an uninhabited ruin. Egypt is a lovely heifer upon whom a gadfly from the north has descended. Even the mercenaries in her midst were like fatted calves, for they too have turned and fled as one, making no stand. For their day of disaster had come upon them, their hour of doom. Hear her hiss like a snake when the Babylonians come in force to attack her with axes, like wood choppers. Says the Eternal One, they cut down her forest, impenetrable though it is, for they outnumber the locusts and cannot be counted. Fair Egypt shall be put to shame, given over to a northern people. The God of heaven's host, the God of Israel, says, behold, I punish Ammon, god of the Tower of No, and Pharaoh the Egypt, her gods and her kings, Pharaoh and all who trust in him. I am handing them over to those who seek their lives, to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and his army. But later on it will be inhabited as in days of old. That is the word of the Eternal. But you, have no fear, Jacob, my servant. Do not despair, O Israel. For behold, I will save you from that distant place, and your offspring from the land of your captivity. Jacob shall return and be quiet and tranquil, and none shall make you afraid. Have no fear, O Jacob, my servant, for I am with you, says the Eternal One. I will bring to an end all the nations to whose land I have driven you, but I will not make an end of you. Though I do not let you go unpunished, I will chastise you justly. Return to our prayer books, page 372. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol adamrot, ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'yoseh, hamdaber u'mkayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek, al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al nimim ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh, שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לכבוד ולתפארת על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת We will rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 376 as we offer first a prayer for our country and then on the next page a prayer for the state of Israel. Thus says Adonai, this is what I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of lawlessness, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry and take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, give clothing and do not ignore your own kin. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand, the evil speech, if you offer compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then your light shall shine in darkness. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. May we never be lazy in the work of peace, and may we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us all to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen. We turn now to page 377, a prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu Shabbat Shamayim, Sur Yisrael v'go'alo. Barech et Medinat Yisrael Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. Hagen aleha be'avrat chastecha ufros aleha sukat shlomecha. Ushlach porcha v'amitcha l'rasheha sareha v'yoatzeha. V'taknem be'etzat tova milfanecha v'natata shalom ba'aretz v'simchat olam liyoshveha v'nomar Amen. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love, spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. Amen. We remain standing in body or spirit as we turn back to page 371 as the Torah is returned to the ark.
יהללו את שם אדוני כי נשגב שמו לבדו הודו על ארץ ושמיים וירם קרן לימו תהילה לכל חסידיו לבני ישראל עם קראו הללויה הללויה כי לקח טוב נתתי לכם תורתי אל תעזבו את חיים היא למה חזיתי בה ותומכך מאושר דרכך דרכי נועם וכל נתיבותיה שלום השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה חדש חדש ימינו חדש ימינו כקדם.
Okay. We're now on the bottom of page 586. Remain standing in body or spirit. Again, bottom of the page.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא.
We're on page 588.
שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל ושכינה תוזו בגובה מרומים הוא אלוהינו העינוד אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו ככתוב בתורתו וידעת היום והשב אותה אל לבביך כי אדוני הוא אלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת עינו ונאמר למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
I invite those who are in mourning, those observing yard sites, to remain standing in body or spirit. Everyone else may be seated. We first think of those who passed in our community in recent months. Miles Ambrose, Fred Eber, Nancy Fisher, Saul Fisher, Edwin Friedman, Sandra Friedman, Lucy Gladstone, Lois Herr, Philip Idone, Phyllis Katz, Laura Kurz, Madge Judith Parcher, Steve Popkin, Vera Shaps, Norma Small, Marjorie Weinberg Berman, Ann Weiss, and Marvin Weiss. We also mark the yard sites that occurred during the last week for Freddie Bartholomew, Beatrice Barak, George Berger, Steve Christman, Alice Grossman, Rose Katz-Grossman, Mildred Heimovitz, Ruth Hesse, James Hodes, George Katz, Hannah Klein, Herman Klein, Joseph Krennick, Joel Margaretin, Fanny Meyer, Jay Morris, Yetta Moskowitz, Diana Oliphant, Millie Peskowitz, Mary Racklin, Louis Rosenthal, Alan Saltzman, Francis Suskind, Sylvia Swerdlick, Adrian Wool, and Mark Zimmerman. If you are thinking of anyone this morning we didn't mention, now would be the time to mention their names out loud at home or simply to hold them in your hearts. Now I invite everyone to join me on page 598 as we recite the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'almad divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechonu v'yomechonu v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha berichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'yimru Amen. Yehei shalom harabba minan shamaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav uyaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Zichronam livracha. May every one of their memories be for a blessing. Okay, if you're still standing, you may be seated. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. A few important announcements. Beginning first with inviting you to join us for Torah study, beginning at 12 o'clock sharp on Zoom. I'm looking forward to that and hope that you will join us. A few other things coming up over the next week, and then I'm looking forward to February. This coming week, beginning actually really on Sunday, as we do in the Hebrew calendar, is the first day of the week. The Women's Rosh Chodesh group will be meeting on Zoom at 2 o'clock. If you're interested in learning more about the group, please contact Shelley Lichtenstein. On Monday, the Nina Mitzvah group will meet on Zoom at 11:30, again on Monday. If you'd like to join, please email Andrea Fagan. If you don't know how to contact her, please let Eileen in the office know and she will make the connection. Hebrew School will meet at 4 o'clock on Monday afternoon. The Social Justice Committee will have its regular weekly meeting at 5 o'clock, and the Musar Practice Group with Myra at 7 o'clock. On Wednesday, my class on Heschel and the Prophets is at noon, and B'nai Mitzvah will meet later that day at 4 o'clock. On Friday, my class on Pirkei Avot meets at 9 o'clock in the morning on Zoom again as well. Just to highlight a few things coming up in February. If you haven't already, I think the February calendar should be out soon. And we have a few things, a lot of things going on, but just to highlight a couple of them. The first is, and thanks very much to our wonderful Sue and Larry Wartor for sponsoring this incredible event. We are having a presentation on the lost world of African American cantors in celebration of Black History Month by award-winning author, performer, producer Henry Sapoznik on February 3rd. Again, that will be on Zoom. On February 9th, we'll have the next art workshop with Lorraine Pepper. And on February 14th, a Zoom talk, author talk with our previous, it says here Rebbitzin, but I think way more than that. She stands on her own, Dasi Berkowitz, who of course was married to our Rabbi Emeritus, Rabbi Leon Morris, and their entire family who moved to Israel. But Dasi has written a new book and is going to present it here for us via Zoom, so it'll be a great chance to see her and to experience a lot of the really remarkable things that she has been writing and thinking about since they moved to Israel in particular. Again, that's on February 14th.
Also, the Social Justice Committee will present a program on expressing social justice through dance on February 15th. Again, this will be a Zoom presentation. And also, we are having a part 2 of our panel discussion from Monday night on the film Shared Legacies. We ran out of time, so we really wanted to add another opportunity for especially Q&A for questions that were submitted at the first one, or questions that you might have been thinking about it since. So please join us again. That will be on February 17th. That's a Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Also, on February 18th, it's a very busy week, a discussion that is going to be on coping and resilience during COVID. And coping and resilience during COVID, which is really an incredibly important conversation for us to be having. And of course, not to forget, at the end of the month, on February 25th, we'll be having our online Zoom celebration of the holiday of Purim, including a reading of the Megillah, and a little bit of humor from our wonderful humor group as well. So please do join us again February 25th. That's a Thursday night if memory serves. Beyond that, please do check your weekly e-blast, the calendar, and if you have any questions, certainly let myself or Eileen know. We'll do our very best to answer them. So I think we're going to conclude our service first with, let's do Yigdal in a while, I think. Page 628.
Yigdal Elohim Chai ve'yishtabach nimtza v'yehinet el metziuto echad ve'en yachid ke'yechudo ne'lam v'gam en sof le'achduto ein lo demut haguf ve'eino guf lo na'aroch ela kedushato kalmon lechol davar nasher nivra Rishon ben Reshit leReshito, Ino Adon Olam lechol notzar, Yoreh gedulato malchuto, Shefa nevuato netanoel, Anshe segulato betifato, Lo kam beYisrael kemoshe od navi hu mamit et emunato, Torah emet natan le'amoel, al yad nevi'o neman beito, lo yachal Yifa'el ve'lo yamir dato le'olamim lezulato, tzofeh v'yodea setarenu mabit lesof davar bekadmato. גומר לאיש חסד כמפעלו, נותן לרשע רע כרשעתו. ישלח לקץ ימין בדות עולם, כל חי ויש יכיר ישועתו. חיי עולם נטע בתוכנו, ברוך עדי עד שם תהילתו. חיי עולם נטע בתוכנו, ברוך עדי עד שם תהילתו.
And if you'd like to join with me, if you have a cup of wine or grape juice handy, or simply to join with me in prayer, we're on page 604, Kiddush.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. על כן ברך אדוני יום השבת ויקדשהו, סברי ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן.
Chaim. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Hope to see you online in just a little bit. But if not, please take care and enjoy this beautiful Shabbat.